We're going to start today by going over some terms that we use when dealing with fractions. The numerator is the top number in a fraction. In the example shown here, 4 is our numerator. The denominator of a fraction is the bottom number of the fraction, and in our case, 5 is our bottom number, so it is the denominator. A mixed number has both a whole number and a fraction. So in this example here, our whole number is 3 and our fraction is 1/2. And when you combine the two to get 3 and 1/2, you have a mixed number. Lowest term, or a reduced fraction, means that we want to simplify a fraction as much as possible. So if we have a fraction such as 6/8, we know that 2 will go into both of these numbers. So what we want to do is divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2, reducing our fraction to 3/4. Since there is not one number that will go into both 3 and 4, we know that we now have our fraction in lowest terms. An improper fraction is a fraction where the numerator is larger than the denominator. For example, if we had the fraction 7/6, since 7, which is our numerator, is larger than 6, which is our denominator, we have an improper fraction. Equivalent fractions are fractions that are equal. For example, if we had 4/4 and 3/3, since they both equal 1, they are equivalent fractions. We could also have the fractions 4/6 and 10/15. These fractions, when put in their simplest form, both reduce to the fraction 2/3. Therefore, 4/6 and 10/15 are equivalent fractions, which means that they have the same value. When told to take the reciprocal, what you are basically doing is you are going to flip the fraction, which means that the numerator will become the denominator and the denominator will become the numerator. An example that we will go over is taking the reciprocal of 3/4. So what we are going to do is we are going to flip the fraction. So our denominator is going to move up to our numerator spot, and our numerator is going to move down to our denominator spot. So the reciprocal of 3/4 becomes 4/3. We can also take the reciprocal of a whole number. And the reason we can do this is a whole number is basically just a fraction over 1. Now that it's in fraction form, we can flip it, so our denominator will move up to our numerator spot, and our numerator will move down to the denominator spot, and our reciprocal for the whole number 2 will be 1/2. A common denominator just means that we want our denominator, which is the bottom number, to be the same number. For example, if we have 1/2 and 3/2, since 2 is a denominator for both fractions, we have a common denominator. If we are given two fractions like 1/4 and 1/6, they do not have the common denominator. And if we are told to find a common denominator, what we will do is list out the multiples of both 4 and 6 until we reach one that's the same. So for 4, we have 4, 8, 12, and for 6, we have 6 and 12. And I can stop right there because I see that they both have a multiple of 12. So I know that my common denominator for 1/4 and 1/6 will be 12. When adding fractions, you must first make sure that you have a common denominator. So for this example, the very first thing we need to do is look and see if our denominator is the same. and in this case it is. Once we have a common denominator, we can just add straight across the numerator. So for this example, we have 1 plus 4, which equals 5, and then our denominator will stay the same. So our answer is 5/3. In the problem 2/5 plus 1/3, we observe that we do not have a common denominator. So before we can add the fractions together, we must first get a common denominator. In this case, our common denominator will be 15. So now we need to change both 2/5 and 1/3 to equivalent fractions that have a denominator of 15. To do this, we determine what we had to multiply our denominator by to get 15. For instance, to go from 5 to 15, we needed to multiply by 3. So we will take our numerator, which is 2, and also multiply it by 3 to get 6. So our equivalent fraction for 2/5 is going to be 6/15. We will do the same thing with 1/3. We know that if we take 3 and we multiply it by 5, we will get 15. So we now need to take the numerator, 1, and multiply it by 5 to get 5. And we know that 1/3 and 5/15 are equivalent fractions. Now that we have a common denominator, we can go ahead and add our numerators. So we do 6 plus 5, which is 11, and our denominator stays the same. So we know that 2/5 plus 1/3 equals 11/15. Just like adding fractions, when we subtract fractions, the first thing we need to look for is a common denominator. We cannot subtract fractions without a common denominator. So for this example, 3/4 minus 1/3, we cannot just subtract 3 minus 1 going across the numerator because we don't have a common denominator. So we are going to change both 3/4 and 1/3 into fractions that have the denominator 12. In order to do that, we must figure out what we had to multiply our denominator by to get 12. For instance, we know that if we do 4 times 3, we are going to get 12. So in order to maintain an equivalent fraction, we must also take our numerator and multiply it by 3. And 3 times 3 is 9. We will do the same thing with 1/3. So 3 times what is 12? 3 times 4 is 12. So we take 1 times our 4 to get 4, and we know that 4/12 is an equivalent fraction to 1/3. Now that our denominators are the same, we can go ahead and subtract straight across our numerators, getting 9 minus 4, which is 5. And just like when we add fractions, when we subtract fractions, our denominator will stay the same. So our answer to 3/4 minus 1/3 is 5/12. In order to subtract 1/2 away from 5/6, we must first get a common denominator. In this case, we only have to change one of our fractions, 1/2, because the common denominator between 5/6 and 1/2 is 6. So 5/6 is going to stay the same, and the only one we have to change is 1/2. So to go from 2 to 6, we multiplied by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3, and we are left with 5/6 minus 3/6, and 5 minus 3 is 2, and our denominator is going to stay the same, which is 6. So our answer is 2/6. However, we're not quite done. We always want to leave our fraction in lowest terms. And since 2 and 6 are both even, we know that we can reduce that by dividing both the numerator and the denominator by 2 to get 1/3. So our answer for 5/6 minus 1/2 is 1/3.